Let's get into the Senate deal. This is the way it seems to be working. Is that Nancy Pelosi has another deal for another bill for $2.5 trillion. I think that they came up with that just to sort of like add some pressure and give Chuck Schumer theoretically some leverage in his negotiations with McConnell. I think what we're going to see is this Senate bill is going to be passed by the House in absentia. And in fact, what they may do is some type of like voice roll call, vote over, I guess, a speakerphone or something like that. I don't know. Then maybe they'll do it all on Zoom. I have no idea. But they don't want to bring all the Congress people back to D.C. just for the sake of taking this vote when they can actually just maybe do it over the phone. I'm going to run down what we know is in it to a certain extent, but we were talking about this before. Matt Stoller, made a very good point in something that his email blast big, that what we hear at this point in the process, like this is one of those situations. I said this yesterday. You're not going to know what's in the bill until it passes, and really, you're not going to know what's in the bill till it passes, and then a little time passes. And people start to dig through it and see what's in there, because what happens on bills like this, particularly something that's just massive, it's unprecedented. Yeah. Everybody puts something in there. And a lot of times, the people who might have a problem with a given provision don't even necessarily see that provision. They see it, but it doesn't register them like what could be problematic about it because of the way that it's written. And so each person who wants something from this steps up, devises language that looks like they're not getting it, or essentially, and then, lobbies to get that in the bill and, does like, well, it's just a thing for the thing, just do that. And if it doesn't, scream at you, that's the way these things get in there. So, presumably staffers understand the implications of all this stuff, but there was also clearly the reason why this is $2 trillion is because there was a little bit of like, I say yes to you, you say yes to me. And of course, what inevitably happens is the Republicans are always more like, okay, as long as we have that dynamic and we're going to ask for everything we want, and you're just going to ask for about, maybe a third of what you want. And that's the way that this works. But as of now, it is $2 trillion. $500 billion in federal funding for big businesses and municipalities. A lot of that is business. There's a $500 billion loan program for businesses, the details of which we don't know. There's supposedly oversight of this, like some type of independent body that existed during the bailout in 2008, for whatever that's worth. $50 billion was allotted to passenger airlines. Unclear again what the strings were attached to this. I have a feeling it wasn't much, but we'll get a better sense of that. But there is an inspector general in the Treasury Department who's going to oversee these funds. There's going to be a congressional oversight panel to examine how the money is being used. And the big thing that Schumer, Michael, this is like a classic Chuck Schumer thing. He's so proud of this. I got him.
More legroom.
Schumer's office announced they secured a provision that will prohibit the businesses controlled by the president, the vice president, members of Congress, and heads of executive departments from receiving loans or investments from Treasury programs. The children, spouses, or in-laws of lawmakers and executive officials also cannot receive these loans. Now, this isn't going to stop them.
Yeah, it's of course not. And we've got a Treasury slush fund essentially with people like Steve Mnuchin overseeing it. I think my big, and this would just be politically impossible, but could you imagine if the Democratic negotiating position was, and forget even the various levels of left to center right position in the Democratic Party, but they just said, look, this is your fault. You engaged in criminal negligence on this for weeks. You're going to get punished because there's going to be thousands of unnecessary deaths conservatively, and the economy is going to take a body blow. So you need to sit down and listen. And here's what we're going to do. We need to have one bill that we pass first, and maybe it's, whatever. Obviously, there's me. I want Medicare for all. I want a real comprehensive bill. Whatever. Not even that. Some type of basic cash transfers, radically increased unemployment. We are going to take care of people first, and then in another couple of weeks, we can figure out what this bailout's going to be. As long as you have the population hostage, you can push through whatever the lobbyists want. And obviously whatever the lobbyists want is most extreme with Republicans, but it goes for most parties. And yeah, we're going to see, I'll stop wearing Adidas for a couple of weeks, although they were less flagrant. They wanted they wanted you to be able to use some rebate for a gym membership. The Mars Candy Corporation wants, we're just going to see, as you said, when the bill's finally out there and we're reading it, we're just going to see endless from comical to egregious.
Well, I want to just take the sort of like the tactical thing a step further. One of the problems that the Democrats have in this situation is that the polling so far, and I think this has been a failure of the Democrats, and frankly, like a failure of Biden as the so-called presumptive nominee. On some level, he should have been out there earlier. He's still not, sort of having any type of like pointed a discussion of this in any way. And he's the guy who supposedly would get the attention to do this. But the polling is, does not reflect that premise that you started off with.
Well, no, I'm saying an alternative play starting a month ago. Well, yes, I think, of course, and I said, by the way, I did say a month ago, I said, I'm not convinced that this is what finally hurts Trump, because I don't have the confidence in them to play this right. And that's the timeline we're on now.
And we'll see by the end, but
we'll see by the end.
But as right now, they don't have that ability to do. And the second thing is that the problem with doing this type of omnibus bill is just what Michael said, because if you tie in relief to people with relief to businesses, the leverage shifts. But if you basically said, if Nancy Pelosi had come up first with a package, we have two packages. Package number one is we're providing extended unemployment. We're expanding SNAP. We're giving whatever it is, $2,000 a month to adults and $2,500 a month if they have kids, or whatever it is. We provide whatever that package is. If that is separate, and then we also have a business relief bill, two separate bills, so that the pressure then becomes like, oh, you're not going to pass this one for people. This one's got to come first. But when you combine them together, then all of a sudden the leverage shifts. And now look, that may be the argument against that is like, well, it'll slow the process down. But I also think it could be that, maybe there's a pressure on the Democrats to feed these troughs a little bit too. And
I think that's the structural problem, is that the Democrats are obviously mostly just as complicit in a lot of this type of very specific thing, in terms of the sort of corporate, giveaways. But, at some point, and I think, look, that's the reason we don't see this from the Democratic Party. I don't think it's timidity. I think it's their own compromise in the process. But I have to say, on a tactical level, I think at some point we need to, we can always explain why they might not take a bold move, and they never do. And at some point we have to see, like, if she did that and Schumer did that 3 weeks or a month ago and it backfired, well, that would give us new information. But we have always is that they don't make moves like that. And we're in a situation now where Trump is in the 50s in terms of handling this. The talking points about getting people back to work are scientifically insane and totally immoral. but during that window of time where it didn't even look like any help was coming, and now we know the help will be pretty insufficient. I see the political appeal of that rhetoric. I mean, to certain people, like, hey, I gotta go work. I don't have any money, so it is, regardless of ideology, it's very dangerous to not have a properly functioning opposition party. And I really hope people, even who have different politics than me, can register that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it would have been reasonable to expect them to try this a month ago. I mean, a month ago was
2 weeks ago. There was a time, even Politico, I forget, Waldman in Politico 2-3 weeks ago was like, Nancy Pelosi is not acting on the leverage she has.
2 weeks ago, I agree.
2 weeks ago.
Things have moved so fast.
So let's say 2 weeks ago.
A month ago, a month today, actually, was the debate prior to the last debate prior to Super Tuesday.
So, yeah, right. It wasn't on
when everybody was on stage.
Yeah, it wasn't on anybody's radar.
I was bemoaning, like, they're not talking about coronavirus at all. And everybody's like, yeah, well, whatever.
Let's say 2 weeks ago. Let's say 2 weeks ago.
I mean, I think that they should have had something like this. But I will say this, and let me just go through this a little bit more and say at least what we know are the headline things. This is not the end of it. They're going to come back. They're going to be back in 3 weeks.
Of course.
With the fourth. I mean, remember, this is stage 3 essentially. There were 2 other bills that were already passed that presumably were providing aid. Nobody even remembers what they were because they're so insufficient. I'm convinced this is going to be insufficient as well, frankly. But we shall see. This slush fund does have more oversight than just Mnuchin, but I don't know how effective that's going to be. The new bill will increase unemployment insurance by $600 a week for 4 months. The money is in addition to what states pay as a base for unemployment. And this benefit would extend to gig economy workers, presumably contractors, freelancers, and on top of that, workers who were out of work, furloughed, but still on their health insurance program from their employers, but are not receiving a paycheck. I don't know what we do for folks who are not, are outside of those windows, but I imagine we would need to have something like an expanded SNAP and other supports.
The Rashida bill. $2,000 a month for everybody for a year. I mean, I think it's as simple as that.
Schumer also said, here we go. And $150 billion for hospitals treating coronavirus patients. Of that money, $100 billion will go to hospitals. $1 billion will go to the Indian Health Service. The remainder will be raised to increase medical equipment capacity. So that $100 billion is presumably because some of these hospitals are saying that they simply don't have the cash to buy the equipment that they need. Schumer also said...
I'm sorry. I've heard that the House version essentially has, I think Matt Brunig said the Senate version does not have, but the House version essentially has Medicare for all Corona, in the sense of, a kind of complete expansion that, look, if you have a question about this specific disease, you're covered. The Senate bill doesn't have that. Do we have a sense of that?
It doesn't say anything to that effect at all. So it's possible, but we don't know yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Schumer said $150 billion of the federal money would be allocated for state and local governments who are dealing with the impacts of the crisis in the local communities. Completely insufficient, including $8 billion for tribal governments. That means that the other $350 or so will be going to businesses. Mm-hmm. The legislation would include, here we go. And this is not, again, insufficient, but it is at least a stab. And it is sort of, right now, what these things are doing are creating a structure that later become the baseline for the second tranche. It's hard to imagine if you've got to come back to this, that it's going to be less the next time.
Right.
A one-time check, $1,200 sent to most adults making $75,000 less annually. That's according to past tax returns. That is unhelpful if you were making $100,000 and you have no job as of a week or two ago. A $500 payment would also be sent to cover every child in qualifying households. I mean, the problem you're going to have there is that if you've lost your job, I mean, maybe the unemployment will pick up on that. And maybe theoretically you have saved enough money, but $1,200 one time is just not going to do it anyways.
And also we have to consider, prisoners that are being released and undocumented people. And again, regardless of even a moral stance, if you want to look at it this way, I mean, these are populations, like, you're dealing with a pandemic. You need to help people protect and insulate themselves in the context of a pandemic, period.
Right. I mean, New York just released 300 prisoners. They need to release more. But then what?
Yeah, no, there's no provision.
The final policy on that front marks a significant change from the direct payments initially proposed by Republicans, who would have given less to many individuals who do not have taxable income. So in other words, they were making their bailout regressive. Yep. There's $367 billion in the bill aimed at providing loans for small businesses. This is according to the Washington Post. I don't know what that really means. But
that's an important one, right? I mean, because I think, like, we actually do need to, there's plenty of people who have like actual small businesses. Like they own one shop, and no, I know you support that, and we need to get them money, and we need, because those businesses actually provide enormous value. And to the extent we have even a piddling counter monopoly in this country, it rests on those in a lot of cases. And I would not be surprised if, in a couple of months, we're saying, why did Citibank get a small business loan? Oh, well, they loan money that goes to small businesses.
Right. Well, my understanding of the initial drafts of this was that a portion of that was basically a grant. That was, if you borrow money to payroll your people who are payrolled, that there's loan forgiveness built into that. That was just we're going to have to wait to see what the details are. But the idea is it's a backdoor way of paying money. Now, it is reminiscent of what they have decided to do. I think is it Denmark? They, if you can believe it, in Denmark, they basically said to employers, we will cover 90% of your payroll for 4 weeks. We'll do it for a month. 90% covered. If you pay your workers to go home,
yep,
and you pay them to go home, we'll cover 90% of it. And we will cover some percentage of, like a similar percentage of your rent, of your fixed overhead costs. So as a small business, you're shut down. You're paying out maybe, I don't know, what comes down to maybe 8% of your costs or something to carry your business forward for a month. And that's what they're doing across the board. And I imagine, they already have stuff in place already for folks who are not working. That's one of the.
We also did this weeks ago. I mean, it's just better governance. I mean, South Korea, there are just these examples of, and it's very important. I like that it's really important to politicize these examples, because we get these little like explainers, occasionally, like, hey, look at South Korea. They've got these amazing mobile tests. In Denmark, that's a nifty idea. And it's like, well, they're able to do that because in South Korea's case, they have comprehensive, they have single payer plus, and, Denmark has a social democracy. This isn't just like, oh, they're a little bit more technically proficient than we are. They have better, they have a context to do these things. In the Thomas Friedman column, where he's making the upmarket argument that Trump's making to go back to work, he keeps kind of covering his ass with like, oh, of course we need like rapidly deployed resources to hospitals and, and get the testing problem solved. And it's like, well, how, Tom?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things too, we should say just about in terms of the Denmark example and South Korea for that matter, and frankly, almost all the countries that we talk about, it's hard for me to imagine that we're talking about the challenge that we have is that they all start from a baseline where they provide enough social services that they're in some instances, they're just topping off, right? Like they can step up and say, we're going to go big here. 90% of your employees, we're going to pay you. We're going to reimburse you. We're not even reimburse. We're going to front you 90% of the cost of paying your employees to stay home. We're going to pay you up front your rent for a month. And they don't have to worry about who falls in the cracks because those people are already taken care of. And so it makes dealing with a crisis like this that much easier to withstand. I mean, I think like this is we're going to see, and people should understand we are at the beginning of this. And there may be different places where it spikes and drops, but we're at the beginning of this. If you combine both the health and the economic questions, and we just don't know where it's going to go from here. I mean, New York has accelerated very, very quickly, and it is becoming clearer that the response should have been sooner. And maybe part of it is just like there's no federal authorities saying like you guys got a problem in our biggest city. And frankly, I think Donald Trump was like, screw him. I mean, that's the way that the Republican Party treated New York prior to 9/11, and I think we've like returned to the means, as it were.
He lost. Well, he's not going to take care of any place he lost.